Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Kiomet. We get some music playing there on the background for us. So, I have a little bit of a different kind of video today. I want to do a tutorial video on how to play Kiomet. Now, I've never done a tutorial like this before, so it's probably going to be pretty rough. But I have snuck onto the Kiomet test server where there are no other players. Don't tell Squirrel that I snuck onto the test server. Because I want to, have kind of a safe place to kind of play around without having to worry too much about anything other than bots. But let's just jump right in, and we'll see how things go. So I am Sneak, and I'm going to jump in here. So every single time you start a game of Kiomet, you're going to be hit by kind of the same sort of start. You're always going to start with a couple of production buildings around you. You're always going to start out with a couple of other things. The big thing is, at the very start of the game, you just want to move your units out. It doesn't really matter too much where you move them. You just want to get a little bit of a buffer zone between you and your king. And then you can worry about upgrades and what does what and what does where. You just want to keep everything at arm's reach, right? So, bare basics, you have certain buildings that will produce units. Currently, there are two types of buildings that produce units. There's the barracks line and there's the aircraft line. So the barracks line are these guys right here. The aircraft line are these guys right here, and they can be upgraded as well. If you go into help here, this will run down basically everything that you need to know about the game, but there's a lot of information here, and a lot of it is not necessarily important when you're first learning the game. So here we have your barracks. Your production buildings are probably your most important buildings when you're just learning how to start to play the game, right? You want a big army. You want a lot of these dudes running around, taking land, and conquering areas, right? So, for the most part, you want to capture as many of these production buildings as possible, and you'll do that just by expanding as well. Couple things to keep in mind when you're just starting out. Infantry, moderate speed. They do okay at taking land, and these bots are going to be a little bit problematic, but that's okay. Aircraft are very fast. They are much better at taking land. So if you get into a situation where you have the opportunity to get a runway, absolutely grab it. Use those to spread out more quickly. It's definitely worth doing so. So when you're starting out, don't worry too much about points. Don't worry about, getting bigger than anyone else. Don't even really worry too much if somebody else is pushing into you a little bit. You just want to expand. Again, you want to get that buffer zone. You want to try to take as much as you can, because this is free real estate. All of this gray area in here, that is all unclaimed land that somebody's going to claim, and it might as well be you. Right? Kind of just going to try to push these bots back a little bit. That's the one drawback with playing on the test server, is that the bots can be pretty aggressive. But that's okay. That is A-okay. You don't have to worry about anybody cursing you out in chat or whatever. But, yeah. So, once you get to a little bit of a size, not too big, but a little bit of a size, you'll want to start upgrading things. Now, my recommendation is you want to upgrade as many barracks to armories as possible. right? I think you need 2 for a construction prerequisite. Certain buildings have requirements for... I don't think I can see that in here. No. Oh, I can. Yeah, so certain buildings have construction requirements, and I believe there is one that requires 2 barracks, but I'm not sure which one it is. The construction requirements later on don't really matter. You will absolutely have enough buildings for everything. So I don't have them internalized. There's something in my mind sticking out that says that I need at least 2 barracks. So there probably is a reason for that. Let's see. I don't know what that reason may be, but it is what it is. So I don't really have too much of a rhyme or reason to how I expand in the initial stages. You just want to make sure that you're expanding as much as possible. You want that land. So, how should I put this? Let me think for a moment while I'm expanding my land. So, the way that units work, the way the production buildings work, the way that units kind of spawn onto the map and control themselves is you have buildings. So let's take the barracks for example. So the barracks can produce 1 infantry unit every 6 seconds. And they can house up to 12 infantry units. So you see here 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So this barracks will no longer produce... I think my music's a little bit loud. Let me turn that down a little bit. So this barracks will no longer produce units until we move them out. So to do that, you just, you drag from the building onto a spot. And they're not going to stay here because the factory also has a certain limit of how many units they can contain. They can only contain 4 infantry. So over time, this overcrowding, they call it tower is overflowing, they will slowly go away, and I'm really getting attacked over here. So I'm just going to send these guys down this way. And all of the buildings have that limit. They have some kind of limit to prevent you from just building up units forever, right? They don't want... One of the big things about the game is the game doesn't want you to build up infinite units until you can just roll over the map. That's just the way the game is made. The game is made so that you cannot do that, which is absolutely fine. That's the way it should be. So we have to do something with these units, or they're just going to go to waste, right? Eventually, I think I turned the music way down. This is professionalism at work right here. Anyway, so we have to do something with these units. So the most logical use, actually, here's a great example. So this building right here, the armory. We just upgraded this. So the armory can house 4 infantry and 5 tanks. And as you can see right here, 5 tanks and 4 infantry. So I could send these guys out, and they'll be a pretty powerful squad. So, as I was saying, we want to keep our units moving. We want to attack with them. We want to do something. Because if they're just sitting around like they're doing, they're going to waste, right? That's time that your units, that you can produce more units. It's time that you can attack and take more land. And all of that is very important. If you want to get big, right? That's the ultimate goal of the game. The ultimate goal of the game is to become, number one on a leaderboard. Now, obviously, since I am the only person in this test server... Sorry, I had to cough. Because I am the only person in this test server, I am number one, because bots don't appear on the leaderboard unless somebody is pretending to be a bot. But that's just the way that it goes. So you want to keep moving your dudes, you want to keep moving your troops, you want to keep doing something with them. But this is a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work to just constantly be trying to push your units out and, attack the enemy. So we want to try to automate that a little bit, because otherwise we're just going to be doing that all day long. Fortunately, the game does have a way to automate it. You might be wondering why I haven't gotten into any of the buildings yet. The buildings don't matter. Not at this stage. At this stage, we're just covering, how to get units, military units, how to attack people, basically. The two basics of the game. What specific units do after that is another story. So, fortunately, the game has a way of running... I'm going to move my king way back here, just to make it a little bit safe, because they are within nuke range, kind of. So, whenever you click on a building, so you can, drag out to move units like that. You can also click on a building to see what's in it. If you click on a building and then drag out as if you were trying to move units, you'll see a dashed line. So if I bring this dashed line, let's say, to this barracks, just right next door, the tanks that are there will move. And you'll be like, wait a second, Macross, that's great and all, but the tanks could already move. That's right. But what you'll find out is when this building gets maxed out on the number of tanks, when it reaches 5 tanks, basically, when it can't hold any more tanks, it will send the tanks forward to this location. And then, of course, we can also do this with the barracks, and it will do functionally the same thing. So as you'll see, when this caps out, it will automatically move the troops. So if you want to know how to automate attacking, functionally what you do is you create these supply lines, as they're called. And it will automatically send your troops between 2 nodes. And then you can use that to attack. So now these guys will go forward. These guys, which we sent down here and are being sent back, will also go forward. And these tanks here that just got finished being built here will also move forward. And they will move forward automatically until one of these points are captured or destroyed, and they will move forward to wherever you tell them to go. In this case, I can't really see what they're targeted on, but that's okay. They're targeted on this reactor. Okay. So as you'll see, as they move forward, they will die, usually, but they will move forward, they'll attack entrenchments, and they'll capture land. So you might be wondering, well, why did those guys fail, right? Why are these infantry just dying? I don't see any units at this launcher. It's just kind of there. Well, these tanks are going to cause a problem, but that's okay. All buildings in the game have what's called a shield. So, shields are produced by all towers. There is a cap to them, and they're functionally damage resistance. They are quote-unquote HP. We'll just, for the simplicity, we'll call it the HP of a building. and they regenerate over time, as you see right there. So when you attack, each unit has an amount of damage that it can do. So infantry do 1 damage, and tanks do 3 damage. So the reason why I say that you should always try to grab tanks over infantry is that infantry are kind of bad. So that was a example. Here's another example. Damage is also doubles as your unit health, basically. So when a unit deals its damage, it dies. Okay? And here we have more tanks coming from the automation down here. So when a infantry unit hits anything, it dies. If a tank hits 3 infantry, the infantry do 3 damage, the tank does 3 damage, and they cancel each other out. And that's functionally how damage and health work in this game. And there's some other things which we'll get into, but I'm going to try to take advantage of this guy leaving as much as possible. So, how do we expand this idea into longer terms? Well, what we need is to get all of our troops moving. And we want to get rid of our infantry because infantry are garbage. I have a hate relationship with infantry. Infantry are not good. They do 1 damage, and their only redeeming quality is that they're slightly faster than tanks. Now, there are people who will die by infantry, because infantry is faster than tanks. They're faster. They can take land quickly when you compare it to the tanks, which are very slow. And they will build nothing but infantry. The problem with that idea is that given enough time, and this is a time game, this is a commitment game. The longer you put into the game, the better you'll do. And overall strategy over the long term has a tendency of trumping short-term gains. You can send your infantry line into my territory, but as soon as my tanks hit that infantry line is going to fold like a paper bag. So I am not a fan of infantry. I strongly recommend not to have any more than 2 barracks. So I'm just going to go through. I'm going to upgrade all of my barracks. I still think there's something that I need 2 barracks for, but I don't remember what it is. My memory is not the best right now. But if you screw up at upgrading something and you need the lower version, you can always downgrade it back to a barracks. So we can do that with that. And it'll just take a little bit of time, and it'll resolve itself. So once again, I'm not talking about any other buildings right now. I'm not talking about nukes or anything like that. I'm just trying to run you by the basics. So let's say we're not at war with anybody. We're at war with a bunch of bots right now, but that's okay. You want to keep your troops moving still. Okay? Because you want to make sure that you don't lose. This building here... well, these buildings are producing things because they just got upgraded. But once they hit 5 tanks, they're not going to produce anything. So you got to get your units moving. You don't have anywhere to go, or maybe you do have somewhere to go. Maybe you want to attack a bot down here. So the easiest way I've found to control my units is I pick a point that's somewhat centralized. Let's upgrade these guys real quick. Like, let's say at this point right here. We're going to turn this into a barracks. You might be asking yourself, why am I turning that into a barracks? Barracks are bad. You said so yourself. You're right. The reason you turn it into a barracks is so that you know what you're looking for. And that'll be important when you have a large empire. So I want to funnel all of my armories using the supply lines, clicking and dragging. We'll talk about that guy in a moment. Into this one spot. And they will all go here. You then want to move this barracks forward to, let's say... let's just ignore all this mess over here for the moment. We'll move it down to... This gap in between my empire is not helping. We'll move it to here, okay? And we want to move all of these guys. Do I have any more? I don't really have many armories around here, do I? To here. So this guy is now collecting all of our infantry and moving it here in this little lobe here, moving it down towards the front. This guy, for simplicity's sake, we can just move it back, just so that, again, you want to keep your dudes moving. Even if it's back and forth, it's not so bad. So what happened here? Why didn't this guy move forward? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. A supply line can only go so far. You can't just run a supply line the entire length of the map. And you can see where they end because you get that little orange line. It's not that big of a deal. You can just run this into this armory, and then the units will go to there, and then they'll go to their destination. Pretty straightforward. So, essentially what we want to do is we want to pick a centralized point where we can kind of... That's actually a really bad point. We may have to do this one. Yeah. You want to pick centralized points where you can route your units. And you might notice I'm not talking about airfields yet either. We'll get into airfields here in a minute. Airfields are a special kind of building. We'll just put it like that. And eventually, what this will do is it will send all of your units into this patrol point right here. Now, there's limitations to how far units can go. A group of units, so this is a group of units, this is a group of units, so on and so forth. All these units moving around are groups of units. The formation of units can only move, I think, 150 towers. So, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc., etc., the so on and so forth. They can only move so far before they start taking attrition, before they start despawning. And that's, again, just to prevent you from having infinite troops. Because back before, in the dark times with the zombies, you couldn't create a closed loop like this. You couldn't send units from here to here and then back. Because that was a closed loop. That would cause functionally infinite units. And the game does not like infinite units. So you can use this to build up troops. You can also just use this to attack. So say I wanted to come in and capture, you know, this bunker right here. And eventually, the lines will just start pushing this way. And they'll push through the defenses, and that'll be that. That is probably the most basic form of attack. Just take a bunch of units, put them between supply lines and run the supply lines into your enemy. That is how you attack, and that's also how you defend. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to get into any real in-depth defense while playing around on the test server because the bots are really stupid. But we'll deal with that as the time comes. This is just kind of a basic, what do kind of tutorial. You're in the game, you're learning how to play, etc., etc. All right. So we've gone over the basics of how to move your units. We've gone on over the basics of how unit generation works. Now we have to talk about the other group of units that you have access to, which is the aircraft. So, let me see if I can find a good example. We're going to upgrade this guy. We're going to upgrade this guy. And, of course, there's not another airfield in close proximity. Actually, we'll use these guys right here. These will work perfectly. Okay. So, there are 3 tiers of runway. The aircraft building. There's the runway. There's the airfield. And there's the helipad. Once this finishes upgrading. There we go. Get out of here. Alright. So, one produces fighters, which deal 3 damage. That's pretty good. Kind of. It sounds good. It's the same amount of damage as tanks, right? Yeah. Here's the drawback. You only get one every 30 seconds, which is about half as often as you get a tank. Well, not as great, is it? Not really. So here's a fighter, here's a bomber. We don't have the helicopter yet. So what does the bomber do? Well, the bombers deal 5 damage against surface targets and 1 damage against air. A little bit more complicated. So, bombers do the most damage in the game, barring missiles and nukes and all that stuff. Especially nukes, specifically nukes. Bombers are really... tanks sustain your attacks. Bombers are what pushes through your attacks. But bombers are not very good against fighters. And I don't think I'm gonna easily be able to show that off because the bots probably don't have specific units. But as you can see, even just the regular old vehicle, tanks and infantry are pushing rather deep into this bot. I am losing some ground here, but that's okay. That's to be expected. It's 4 against 1. So then we come to the helicopter. Helicopters are special. They're unique. Because not only do they do 3 damage, they can also carry other units. So if I take these units of helicopters and I move here, they're gonna pick up these tanks and they're gonna take them to the front. So here in this little battalion, we have 3, 6, 9, 12, 14, 16, 18 points of damage, and they're moving quite fast. It seems pretty decent, but it requires you to have armories. It requires you to have helipads. It requires you to coordinate them properly. You're not always going to... like, if I put the helipad and target it here, they will automatically pick up the tank. But they will not always have tanks to pick up. So they're alright. They're decent. I am not against helicopters. Completely. However... and as you play, you'll get a better feel for what's good and what's not. As just starting out the game, you don't really want to worry too much about helicopters and aircraft and what's better and what's worse. My recommendation is that the bombers are the most noob friendly. Yes, they're weak against fighters and technically helicopters as well, but they're not that bad on their own. And in my experiences, the other players don't really organize their airfields to the point where I have had issues with helicopters and fighters. It happens occasionally. I sometimes see somebody use helicopters. I use helicopters occasionally. I use fighters occasionally. I typically go for a consistency somewhere along the lines of about 80% bombers and 20% other things, whether it's helicopters or fighters or what have you. But from a beginning player starting out, just go bombers. Bombers are extremely powerful. They get the job done. They do a lot of damage. And they are quite fast. So we're just going to file those guys directly into the supply lines alongside everything else, because they'll work together just fine. And we're just going to go all bombers, because again, that's the simplest way to do it. It's not too bad. It's not too bad. And as you can see, we are pushing quite deep into bots here. Now, the reason I mentioned that you should target barracks for your supply line center points, I don't. I do projectors, but projectors are a little bit complicated. We're gonna save those for a little bit later in the video. But say you have a big war against multiple players and they're all attacking you at once. It looks kind of familiar, right? It looks kind of like this. So we can use these focal points, which are barracks for me, because I upgraded them all to barracks. That's where I directed my forces. And we can just kind of refocus some of our units. We can keep these guys focused in this direction, but we can just move, like, this is like this back corner of my army, and I can just send them down this way to deal with the bot down here. And it'll take them some time to turn around, but hey, that's alright. And you can utilize that for multiple things. You can use it for multi-front warfare. You can use it to deal with multiple enemies. Sometimes you just want to make a statement. And it's also very good for overwhelming your enemy, which is a tactic I don't think we'll get to in this video. Functionally, when you're very large and your enemy's very small, sending multiple lines of troops into their territory is the best way to overwhelm them very quickly. But we don't have to worry too much about that right now. Alright, so we sniped this bot's king. I'm not sure if that was quite visible on camera or not, but every player has a king, including the bots. Bots are pretty dumb with their kings, but they still have kings. If you lose your king, it does not matter how big you are. You will die. It's really quite simple. So you want to try to make sure your king is protected as often and as deeply as possible. And as you go on, you'll essentially want to expand your supply lines as well. You'll want to find a good centralized position. Don't think any of these guys are really pushed back enough for me to do that. Let's move these guys. We're gonna send them this way. I'm gonna send more guys down here, towards Atom here. So that's really the basics, you know. I've shown you how production works, how buildings upgrade. You know, none of the unit producing buildings really have that complicated of an upgrade tree. I think if we go into help here, the barracks requires a factory and a mine to upgrade, which is not that difficult. They're low-tier buildings. Here's your factories and your mines. I think we started... where did we start? We started here. So in our initial area, we had a mine and a factory 2 jumps away. So, you know, you keep your supply lines running, you keep everything occupied, and that's really the bare bones basics. Doesn't really get into, like, tactical positioning and things like that, but you don't really need to know that. You really don't. This information here is enough to deal with the average player. As long as you use supply lines, keep your units moving, and push into the enemy, you'll be okay. So you notice I asked for alliances from all these guys. If you click on a other player, you can hit this purple hand fist request button to offer them an alliance, and if they do the same thing to you, or you see it's the same symbol but it's purple above their name, you can click on them to accept the alliance, and they won't attack you. They can't attack you. Unfortunately, the bots will always, or I shouldn't say always, bots will ally players. They will ally small players, but not always, and not often. Occasionally, every now and then. So, where do we go from here? You know, we've kind of cleared out our starting area a little bit. We're pushing these guys back a bit, kind of. So we want to learn more. We want to get into some more intermediate things, okay? So how do we do that? Well, there's a few higher skill things, I guess you could call them. Obviously, we've barely touched most of these buildings. We've only really dealt with the construction lines. So let's talk about... Yeah, let's talk about the easiest one. The easiest and still most important line. Or the next most important line, I guess I should say. Let's talk about... Where are they? Where is one? Oh, that's the wrong way. Let's talk about radar, okay? So, radar allows you to see deeper into the enemy territory. This isn't super important, but it can be when you're working in tandem with things like artillery, which we'll get into next. So, radars are these little dishes here. And you capture them, and they give you a little bit more sight range than average. I think it's, what, 4? 1, 2, 3, 4? 1, 2... I think it's 4 out. I think it's 4 towers out from where it's built. And it has an upgrade in the EWS. Requirements for that is just 2 generators. So generators are basic buildings. You'll see them. Let me see if I can find one. They're like this. This is a generator. Fairly common. You don't have to build them. You don't have to upgrade them. If you capture one through your initial expansion phase, you'll be good to go. You'll be golden. So, if you upgrade this, first off, you'll lose the extra sight as it upgrades. Don't. Okay. So once you upgrade it, I had one somewhere. Maybe I didn't. Oh, I did. I upgraded it. Alright, well, let's upgrade this one, just to visually show off what it looks like. And let me just check my lines real quick. Whenever you get a build of units like that, you can use that to kind of backfill into territory that you haven't captured. Like this airfield, for example. Anyway, this isn't going to be a great example, but this is an EWS. I believe it does five or six towers out? 5 or 6 towers out? Does it say? I actually don't know. 66% higher visual rate. It doesn't really say. But it lets you see deeper into enemy territory. And then after that, you have your satellite. Your satellite requires 2 rockets and 5 generators. So it's a little bit more. Rockets can be built, I believe, from radar. Yeah. So in order to get that prerequisite, you just come into the center of your territory way away from the front lines, and you can just upgrade 2 of these guys into rockets. They also have a prerequisite, because of course they do. Their prerequisite is the refinery building, which you can upgrade from this little factory building. Factories have a very important use, which we'll get into later on. But it's no harm in building a refinery so you can build rockets. And then after you build your 2 rockets, you can upgrade to the satellite, which gives you a lot of extra range. So what does this do for you? Oh, this does a few things. This lets you potentially see where the enemy king is. Very important, because if you go after the king and kill him, obviously, it's game over for them, right? It also lets you target their supply lines. Now, the AI doesn't really have supply lines. I don't believe so, anyhow. They just kind of move their dudes around all willy-nilly. Because of course they do. But it's also very important for targeting nukes, artillery, and EMPs, which we'll get into next. Now, I will admit that the nuke, artillery, and EMP game is not my strong point. I'm best with nukes, so I'll probably go over nukes, most importantly. And they're probably the most important building for you to know anyway. So, this is a nuke, a silo, a nuclear silo. It produces nukes. In order to build it, you need a couple of prerequisites. You need to build quarries, which is the tier below it. So these are your cliffs. You build them into quarries, and then they upgrade into your silos. As you can see down here, this can upgrade to a silo. This requires 2 centrifuges. Centrifuges also get built out of factories, which again are these little spiky buildings here, which they require 3 mines, which by this point you should have 3 mines. You just upgrade 2 factories to centrifuges, and then you can upgrade your quarry. Now, I already have the prerequisites. If you didn't have the prerequisites, you would have to wait for these to finish building before you build the silo. So, nukes are... How should I put this lightly? Or how should I put this politely? They're very easy for people to use and abuse, but it's hard to master their use. Because and this is what we're going to run into, this is kind of the drawback of using the test server for this. The best use for nukes, I believe, is twofold. The first use of them is to destroy other nuclear silos within range, so that they can't nuke you. The other use is for disrupting supply lines. So like all of my supply lines run through this point here. If the computer was smart and could hit a nuke here, I would have to redo this supply line, which would be rather inconvenient, especially if the supply line is longer than just that one, or I was paying attention to other things. I'm still quite small. At 300 points, I'm not very big, so microing all of this isn't too bad. But if I was really big, seeing what supply lines were still running, what supply lines was causing problems, what supply line was still doing the most damage, keep in mind that they're probably running their supply lines into you, probably directly trying to counteract your supply line, so disrupting your supply line might give them a chance to get a little bit of ground, and so on and so forth. So you get a nuke every 5 minutes, I believe. That doesn't tell me. Okay. This should tell me. Okay. It's not every 5 minutes. It's every 2 minutes. Every 2 minutes, every nuclear silo on the map replenishes at the same time. Just like that. That just got a nuke. This one's already automatically firing towards the cliff there, which is actually a good spot to fire. And then this silo also got a nuke. So when I say that the nukes are good at anti-nuke, this is exactly what I mean. These nukes have already fired. I can now retaliate by firing 2 nukes at those points right there. Well, how is that useful? I'm going to upgrade this as well so I can get better line of sight. It's useful because they can no longer use those nukes to disrupt my supply lines. They can no longer use those nukes to fire at my nukes. And they have to rebuild, which takes time. You know, it takes some time to go in here and upgrade to a cliff, and then upgrade to a silo, and then you have to wait 2 minutes for another nuke. In that period of time, you can just keep nuking the silo. And they won't be able to do anything to stop you. See, now I can try to upgrade these more, but the nukes, if the nukes continue to come in, I'm never going to be able to get that silo back up. So eventually they're either going to give up, or they're going to change tactics. So what else can I nuke? Well, I can nuke satellites in order to, you know, reduce the amount of distance that I can fire a nuke. I can nuke unit production to try to disrupt supply lines. It's not really that useful to nuke fortifications, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But you can also nuke production buildings that are behind lines, like this one, so that you could keep focusing on moving your units forward. That is really, in my opinion, the best uses for the nuke. Disrupting supply lines and counter-nuking. Now, one thing that I'm probably not going to be able to show off is that you can also use nukes to intercept other nukes. So, say I left these 2 nuke silos here, and they fired on my nukes. I'll see if I can get an example. I might just be targeting my own nukes together. Gotta upgrade this again. See, that's the power of the nukes, is it disrupts sight, it disrupts production, it disrupts supply lines. You should not be nuking everything in range, though. You should not be going down here and going, alright, I'm gonna nuke this refinery, I'm gonna nuke this generator, I'm gonna nuke this reactor. These don't matter. These buildings don't matter. The launcher doesn't really matter either. Like, you wanna focus your nukes on specific things. You don't wanna just launch them all over the place like a nut job. Because people do launch nukes like nuts, like crazy. And they just will not have the intended effect. You can't scare somebody away with a nuke. Alright, so in order to counter a nuke fired at one of your silos, say this was an enemy nuke. This is red, angry, ooh, scary, big bad guys. They fire a nuke at me. I can use this silo to fire a nuke back. Now, I don't think they're going to collide because they're friendly nukes, but when they do collide, they will explode if it was an enemy nuke. So these two now don't have nukes. I can then use this silo to launch a real nuke at it and destroy this silo before it gets another nuke charged up, so they can't counterfire. So that's what I mean by, like, counter-nuking people. And that can be used to absolutely cripple them if they want to use nukes, because they will not be able to get their nukes out. So here they're building a quarry here, so you just nuke the quarry, and by the time they decide they want to build a silo there, they won't be able to build a silo there. All right, so this bot has died. So you're gonna notice as you play the game, area will disappear and reappear. So this bot just died, and it looks like somebody else spawned over here. Another bot spawned over here. This is the way the game sort of expands and contracts the map. So when a player spawns in, there's a bunch of towers that spawn in and around them as well, unless they occupy a spot of... Unless they spawn in recently enough that they can spawn into a location that was occupied by another player. And that territory will often disappear when the player leaves. And it'll turn into this black void. Okay? So it's only a matter of time before players spawn in around you. Even if you're in like a corner or something, it's only a matter of time before somebody spawns in up here and you can expand in that direction. Now, there are limitations. The smaller the map, the fewer the players, the more players will spawn towards the center of the map. Now, I don't know exactly where the center of the map is, but I'm guessing just based on the fact that nobody's spawned over here, I'm guessing the center of the map is somewhere in this direction. It's just a blind guess. So you always want to be aware of what's happening on your borders, and you want to be careful that somebody doesn't spawn in behind you and take a bunch of your stuff. Okay? There's some particulars about it. I believe towers will not despawn. You see these little black areas here is where towers have despawned. I don't believe towers will despawn if they're within a certain radius of your king. I don't know what that radius is, but if I were to send my king down here and a player was to spawn in one of these voids here and then immediately die or something, the towers would remain. So you could kind of utilize that to sort of fill in the blank areas if you so wished to. But the black areas aren't necessarily a bad thing. They can create terrain and choke points that you can use to your advantage. Because larger players can only bring so much to bear. Alright, so let's talk about artillery. Once again, I'm not an expert at artillery, but artillery is okay. So let me just make some space here. So artillery is built in the mine. It's upgraded from mines. This was a good example here. Or this will be a good example if I could take this mine. So a mine gets upgraded to a bunker, which requires an EWS, which we've already covered, is the upgrade to the radar, and 2 headquarters. Headquarters are upgraded from, let's see if I can find them, from a village. And headquarters just require radars, which, again, by this point, you'll probably have several. Headquarters themselves have a bit of a use. Let's see. They have a large amount of shield, which can make them kind of useful for defenses. And they also take reduced damage from shells and nukes. Of course, 20 damage from a nuke is still a lot, but it's less than infinite. And they also take no damage from EMPs, which we'll cover those in a bit, because they're honestly the things I have the least experience with. So that upgrades into a bunker. And a bunker is sort of a better headquarters, is the best way to put it. It's your defensive building. It can contain 40 shield, and it only takes 1 damage from shells and only 10 damage from nukes, which makes it a really good defensive building. At a choke point, like say I had a choke point in here somewhere, like here, I could upgrade this mine. This now becomes a better location to defend from. It gets 40 shields, slows down their attack. Let's move. Yeah, so here's actually an example. I kind of pushed deep into this area here. So I can downgrade this armory to a barracks. And I can just funnel these new production buildings in. And sure enough, I now have even more staying power on this front. Alright, anyway. So in order to upgrade to an artillery piece, I need 2 refineries. Now we've already talked briefly about the refinery. It's built from the factory, this little spiky one. So we need 2 of those. And that's actually, I only have one that I built earlier up here for the rocket batteries, which I don't believe rocket batteries do anything in particular on their own. They just get upgraded to launchers. All right, so that brings us to the artillery piece. So the artillery piece produces shells, which you can fire much like the nuke. It does 3 damage. It travels at a fast speed. It has a fairly short range, but it has a longer range than the nuke. If I was to drag this out, you see I can only reach till about here with the nuke. Well, here, I guess, technically. But if it was here, I could probably reach it out just a little bit farther. Artillery has about the same range. Okay. I stand corrected. I thought they had a little bit more range, but they also seem to have a very short range. But, you know, they generate... Thank you, music. It's appreciated. There we go. So, artillery generates a shell every 15 seconds. That's 9 points of damage per every 45 seconds. In comparison, you have, you know... What is this? This is also 9 points of damage every 45 seconds. And not even close to any of those things. So it's roughly, like, tank-powered. Roughly. Except you can fire them across distances. And they will travel. And they will hit their target. There we go. And you can keep firing. But you'll notice one artillery will not easily penetrate the shields of a building. Just through passive regeneration, this building will take forever to be destroyed by just artillery. In fact, I think it will be destroyed, but it will take a very, very long time. So, 1 unit of artillery, absolute trash. You don't want to use 1 unit of artillery for anything. Because they will just take forever to get through very basic anything. They're just not worth it. And against something like a bunker, they're even less worth it. Oh no, the bot is taking over. Let's move you. We'll take you. I guess we're gonna have to take you there. There's not really any good other barracks nearby. And sometimes you'll have to deal with that. Sometimes you'll just have to take the next best thing. And you'll have to have a somewhat short supply line. Now, 1 artillery piece can't do a whole lot of anything. And they can do even less against a bunker. Because a bunker has resistance, yeah. Yeah, they only take 1 damage from artillery. So you can batter on a bunker all day long and not really make any progress. Let's see. So that's going there. We can take this guy down this way. All right, now, so 1 artillery is terrible, but 2 artillery is not that bad. It's pretty good in the grand scheme of things, because it can overwhelm the passive shield generation of a building. And you don't have to manually target. You can also run supply lines just like a normal, like, technically any production, any building that produces anything you can have a supply line to. And it works the same way with these artillery pieces and the nukes as the infantry buildings. Except you can't run anything but nukes and missiles through them. So, what do you use artillery for? Artillery honestly poses probably a similar effect as nukes. You basically use them to target important things. They're very good at targeting buildings that are behind your supply lines, so you don't have to commit troops to taking them, as are the nukes, except obviously the artillery is a little bit better for it because you get more of them. And they can also be used to shoot down nukes as well. So again, if it's the same idea, if this nuke here, nuke please, all right, we'll wait a second for that nuke to come back up. In the meantime, we're gonna build this, and we'll get to that in a second. Actually, this bot's probably going to die in a second. All right, we'll start building that down there. All right, up here. So if this is the enemy, quote unquote, mythical enemy nuke, if it fires at the artillery piece, you can fire back at the silo, and when they meet in the middle, there'll be a big explosion that will neutralize the nuke. And you can then use the artillery to shell down the silo as well. So now we have the final piece of artillery, the rocket. Now, I will admit, I don't really use the rocket as often as I probably should. So the EMP rocket is meant to be, you'll get a good view of towers despawning from that player dying. Yeah, just like that. Rockets are kind of meant to be like the anti-nuke building. You can use a rocket to shut down a silo pretty handily. They have very long range, much longer range than, say, the nuke. You get them more often. Let's see here. You get the rocket every 80 seconds instead of 120 seconds. They also require 2 airfields to build, which is fine. We know how to build airfields. So not only will it hit its target, it will do a little bit of damage. 1 point of damage, not much. But it will also disable the building. So when a building is disabled, that means it doesn't produce anything. And it also doesn't generate shields, which would be part of its production. So, in essence, you can use that to basically stop a building from working for how long? Is this one? For 60 seconds. For a minute. So you get one of these guys, you get a nuke every 120 seconds. You get an EMP every 80 seconds. And it stops the tower from doing anything for 60 seconds. So you can see how those would be quite useful for disabling nukes. You can also use it on buildings, like that, and it'll prevent that building from generating my brain. It'll prevent that building from generating shields. It'll prevent that building from recruiting units. It will not prevent supply lines from running through that building. It's very important, because in order to do that, you have to use artillery or nukes. So those are kind of the intermediate buildings, so to speak. Honestly, it's most of the buildings that we have left to talk about. Like that's most of the game right there. We've talked about radar, we've talked about artillery, how you use the artillery, unit production. There's only a handful of buildings we have not spoken about. And only one of them really matters. Okay, I guess technically the ramparts matter a little bit. So we'll hit the ramparts here briefly. So ramparts are a defensive building. Much like the bunker or the HQ. You build them out of your cliff. And they're the ones that require 2 barracks. That's why I was thinking that. Because you need 2 barracks in order to build a rampart. And then you need 2 ramparts for another building we'll get into here in a moment. So, ramparts are functionally the worst defensive building. Where are they? They can hold 45 shield, which is not much when you compare it to, well, it's more than the bunker and the headquarters, but the headquarters also come with damage resistance from nukes and artillery. So the rampart has the highest shield capacity, but it also still takes normal damage. It can still be nuked out of existence, which is not great. So, it is what it is. I actually use ramparts a lot for defense, just because the game likes to put ramparts in, like, defendable areas. But, so that's the ramparts. And now we have the useless chain of buildings. We have the village. We have the town. And we have the city. Come on. Cities require a lot. Cities... Alright, I guess we'll start with the town. The town requires a reactor, which we haven't gotten into yet. Reactors are built out of generators, and they require, in turn, a centrifuge, which you also need for nukes, so you'll probably have a couple anyway. And it requires quarries, which, again, you need quarries for nukes, so you'll probably have a bunch of them anyway. That's the upgrade from the cliff to quarry to silo. And that lets you upgrade your towns to cities. What are the town requirements? points. Towns just require 3 villages and a generator. Okay. So 3 villages, which is a lower tier, and a generator. And then the town requires, or the city requires, 3 towns, which are upgraded from the village. A reactor, which is upgraded from the generator, and then 2 of the quarters. And that lets you build a city. So what does the village, town, and city do for you? Absolutely nothing. They are completely worthless. You pretty much never want to build them unless you just don't have any other reason to build anything. They don't produce units. They don't really have that much in the way of defenses. The only thing that they do is give you points. A city is worth 5 points. Any town is worth... Nope. A town is worth 2 points. If you care about getting in the leaderboard, I guess they're important. But you could be on the leaderboard all you want, and it's not going to matter if you can't defend your land. So taking time out of your day to upgrade your villages to towns and towns to cities is not something you really have to worry about. They're just not important. I do it for kicks and giggles sometimes when I don't have anything else to do, but other than that, they're not useful. Not in the least. And in fact, it could make you a target, because there are skilled players in the game who recognize that a player with a lot of towns and cities, even if they're on the leaderboard, may not have as many unit-producing structures as somebody who has the same amounts of points but hasn't upgraded those cities. So my recommendation is not to worry about it unless you don't have anything else to do. So finally, we get to the final building. And boy, there is a lot to talk about with this building. So from your centrifuge, you can build projectors. Projectors require 2 generators, or 2 reactors, which you upgrade from generators. And they require 2 ramparts, so 2 of the defensive structures. And that lets you upgrade a centrifuge into a projector. So the ability to use projectors functionally is what separates skilled players from unskilled players. Like, your unit consistency, your armies, what you put in it, yeah, they kind of matter. But not as much as the projector. So what does the projector do? The projector generates 1 shield every 3 seconds. Doesn't sound that crazy, does it? So what that means is you can move that shield across the lane. If you look here, it says it can send shields along the roads. So what does that mean? Well, it means a lot. Functionally, what it means is this. You can take a projector, you can move its shields from one place to another, and you can overcharge another shield. So this artillery piece now has 32 out of 20 shields, and that will, I believe, slowly go down. Yeah, it'll slowly go down because it's overflowing, just like anything else. And you can set it on a supply line. So when it's fully charged, it will automatically send those shields out. So let's say, for example, that this is the front line, okay? This is my point of defense. This rampart, 45 shields. I can use this projector onto this shield, onto this rampart, and I can pump the shields of that building up even more. I don't remember exactly how high it goes. I think it goes up to plus 20. There is a hard cap. We'll just have to see what it is. So now that rampart has 55 shields. And then it sends more shields forward. And then I can build a second one and I can send its shields forward. It goes up to 60. So this rampart now has functionally 60 shields. What's 60 shields? 60 shields is a lot. 60 shields is 60 soldiers hitting it at the same time, and the soldiers will lose. 60 shields is 20 tanks. Is that right? Yeah, 3 times 10 is 30 times 60. You know, it's 20 tanks. It's 10, it's more than 10. It's 12 bombers. It's a lot. It's a lot of defense for the rampart. You know, you figure, the largest group of units I could think of, as far as damage would be concerned, you get 5 bombers. That's 30 damage. That's 25 damage. Math is hard. Or you could get 3 helicopters. Is it 3 helicopters? I don't use helicopters enough. 3 helicopters and 5 tanks. That's 21 damage? No one unit. The point I'm trying to get across is no one group of units can break this. The only thing that could break this is a tank. Now imagine it's on a mine. Or, not a mine, but a bunker. You know, we do this, the exact same thing. Let's say that this bunker was here instead of there, and we pumped this bunker up. Might take a second. It's nice that we're just kind of off on our own now. We only have a couple of enemies. Is this done? I think it'll cap out at like 55. Yeah, 55. So, 55 is slightly less than Rampart. That's 5 nukes. That's 6 nukes. Because it only takes 10 damage from nukes. It only takes 1 damage from artillery. That's 55 shells. Like, that's a hard point. And if you get like 4 or 5 of these guys on the same building, it can hold pretty steadfast. But that is only the surface of what these guys can do. Because don't just have to be used for defense. These can also be used for offense. So, because these guys can send units forward through the supply lines, it also means that you can use them as a focal point for your supply lines. And I do. I don't usually use barracks, I use projectors. And this has a knock-on effect down the line. Because one thing that happens is that this shield now comes into play. It now gets added to the equation. And we can also do the same thing with this projector. So we just have these 10 shields also moving along this line. Now, the shields can't damage buildings, but they can damage columns of units. So I don't think these guys are going to be generous enough to come this way. I mean, this projector is not going to be powerful enough to stop this whole group of units anyway. But, okay, they're just going to die. Fair enough. But it sends 10 shields along the line, and it will take 10 damage just as if it was a unit. And it will, quote-unquote, deal 10 damage just as if it was a unit. So if it runs into a unit of 10 infantry, what does it do? It destroys them. That's right, they're very good offensive units. Like, it is functionally another squad of infantry. But the benefits don't stop there. Because not only can you use it to damage lines of infantry coming in at you, you can also use it to protect your own infantry. So if you look at some of these infantry units that are running along this line with the projector now, right here, this is a good example here. Do you see the circle around that infantry? It's kind of weird, isn't it? That's the shield. That's the shield that the projector is producing. And when the infantry moves forward and bounces off the projector, they take the shield with it. So that 5 shield that was in that projector is now around those infantry, and it will protect that infantry from damage. Words cannot describe how incredibly powerful projectors are. They might not even be too powerful. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like, obviously, like, they can't take towers, but the fact that you can use them to protect your units while the units take towers, and once the units actually take the tower, I believe that the shield is dispersed, so it's not like a permanent thing, but it's still really, really good. Now, it has drawbacks. It has a lot of drawbacks. It is a very good unit, building, tower, whatever you want to call it, but it has massive drawbacks, okay? So what are the drawbacks? It's weak, because it doesn't always have the shield around it. If it just launches a projector shot, like that, it has no shields left. Come on. It has no shields left. Which means an artillery piece can destroy it. It means an EMP can destroy it. It means a nuke can destroy it. All of these things can destroy it. And then the problem when it gets destroyed, you know, let's say that destroyed it. Oh, I took it back, but it's destroyed. Now I have to build it again. Now I have to put it You know, I have to upgrade it 1, 2, 3 times. It's not 3 times. You upgrade it to a centrifuge, that takes some time. And all the meantime, your units are here. They're taking attrition. They're dying. You're not getting the benefits of your shields. So you want to look for projectors, and you want to destroy any projector the enemy has, because it's a game changer. These things are game changers. I slept on projectors for the longest time, and I regret it. They are very good. And if a skilled player will target them down. Absolutely they will. And then you have to fall back on older tactics, and you have to start building your projector force up a little bit more. But think about it. You know, I have this centrifuge here. I can upgrade it into a projector. I can send it along my lines. I can upgrade these factories here. I can upgrade this centrifuge there. I can put it in. Now there's easily more power coursing through the veins of this line here. They are very, very good. They are very good and very powerful. So, obviously I have not really thought and planned out this video. But the last thing we're going to talk about is how to prepare for a war. And that sounds a bit weird. Like, what do you mean how to prepare for a war? I've been constantly at war. Let's say you're planning on attacking somebody. Say you have an ally and you want to break that alliance. You're surrounded by allies, and you have to break your alliance with somebody so you can expand. So how do you plan for that? How do you prepare for that? Well, let's pretend that we're allies with BMO here. We're not, but we're going to pretend we are, and he's going to make it difficult for me to pretend that we are. So I turned my barracks line back on itself. So I now have these two barracks lines patrolling through each other, functionally. And I'm also going to bring this line down. I'm going to try to concentrate a lot of power into this area. But I'm not just going to concentrate my power on that one line. That would be a mistake, because you can only send so much power through a single line. I don't remember the exact numbers. Essentially, between two towers, there can only be so many units along this line heading in the same direction. So I think it's 10, but it might be 8. They've changed it a couple of times. But essentially what that means is there's only so many units you can send this way. There's only so many units you can send this way. So if you try to concentrate all of your army into one line, you're going to lose people. You're going to take attrition. But you still want to concentrate your units in one general area. And the best way to do that is through your supply lines. You want to utilize your supply lines. You want to create usually two, depending on like who you're fighting. If you're fighting a larger player, you may want to have like 5 or 6 supply lines, concentrating units at the same time. But these units aren't dying. Well, you might lose some, but you're not going to lose a lot. And they're just going to concentrate in this area. And the same thing goes for these guys here. They're just going to accumulate and become quite the fighting force. Of course, these are all bots, and they're being stupid aggressive and not letting me do what I want, but that's fine. Planning a surprise attack on another player usually is a little bit easier. If they have radar or something, they might know something is up, but they're not going to look back this far and be like, huh, this is a little bit odd. Because they're still like half a dozen towers away from the border, right? So while you're off doing something else, say you're consolidating supply lines or upgrading buildings or what have you, you know, whatever you're doing, you know, we could actually set up a third line here. Yeah, we're gonna set up a third supply line here. Just to maximize how much damage we're doing at the same time. Just to really drive home how to plan for a war. Alright, so they're going there. The problem is I think they have a EMP they're targeting on this factory, which will be kind of problematic. I'm just trying to make sure the bot doesn't push too deep into me. Alright, so obviously this isn't going to be perfect. But I do want to get a nice little attack force going, so it's going to be a few minutes. And then I can run this back like that. Yeah. It's too bad I can't fast forward time. Alright, we don't actually have to wait that long. So, you've concentrated your forces along, well, in this case, we'll say three lines. And you want to attack, let's say we're going to attack BMO down here. All you do, once you set up your supply lines, is you take the closest supply line forward, and you just push it into the enemy. Where do you go? Actually, that's a good question. Let me take a look here. Let me upgrade this radar and see where a good place to go in it. That is why projectors are weak. They are quite powerful, but they are also very easily targeted. So now I'll have to rebuild this. Unfortunate. Yep, there's the nuke. So imagine that happening in the middle of a war. I'm over here monkeying with my supply lines, and then, oh no, my dudes can't move forward. It's the drawback of using projectors for supply lines. If you use something like a barracks, technically it's not so bad. You can just reset the supply line and it'll just go. Alright, so when deciding where to take your units, you want to look for functionally choke points. Points where you can cause the maximum amount of damage and kind of converge your troops to get a good defensive bonus. So this is a small bot. At least it seems like a pretty small bot, but we're going to do something like this. Actually, there's their king right there. We're going to do that, and we're going to do this. So you want to take, you know, as many independent routes through your enemy as possible, depending on how big they are and how big you are, obviously. And you want to try to end it at a choke point so that they can't easily take it back. And ideally, you're just going to push through them. I mean, if you've concentrated your forces enough, even against a larger player, you can a lot of times just push through their initial lines. And it might take them a few minutes to notice. It might not, but a lot of times it does take them some time. Most of them are human. Bots aren't particularly dangerous, as I have shown. And over time, you're just gonna push in. You're gonna take more land. And they'll react. They'll send their own supply lines. Generally speaking, when you're trying to counter enemy supply lines, you want to run your largest supply line into theirs to stop them from pushing forward. And then you want to use your other side supply lines to kind of take land out and around the other areas. But you see all these units are just pouring in, and there's nothing this bot could do to handle this. They just do not have enough people. And it wasn't slow either. Once units actually started going across the border, they crumpled rather quickly. And then you can go in here and you can kind of use your tanks and, you know, some of your captured land to take some of these side or back areas. Something like that. And kind of clean up the border a little bit. And ultimately, I blew this up again. I think this was going like that. Ultimately, there is not much they can do to stop you. Huh, that bot died. That's convenient. And you also want to grab, like, radars, especially if you're playing against a larger player or a big player, not necessarily a larger one. You want to find their king, and at the very least, you want to corner their king. There's an argument against capturing their king and killing their king, because if you kill their king without taking a bunch of their land, a lot of their land will just despawn. But you want to make sure that you have their king in a position where you can kill them if you need to, in case they start pushing you back. Because you don't know. They could be quite large. They could have allies. They could ask their allies for help. They could do all sorts of things. They could do all sorts of things. So once you push through them, it's largely just a matter of cutting off their supply lines, taking their more dangerous like buildings, especially any like silos or I don't know if I would worry about cliffs unless they actively try to upgrade them to silos. And you just want to keep extending your supply lines deeper. Eventually you'll want to set up your own, but when you're attacking someone, you mostly want to worry about just defeating them. And then they die. So, what else is there to talk about? I guess there's a few extra things to talk about. Supply lines. If you want to see all of your supply lines, you push R. And that will show you all of your supply lines from your helicopter to your armory to all the concentrations around your focal supply line points. If you want to cancel a supply line, there's two different ways. The first way is you can just drag a new supply line and drag it onto where you already have a supply line. So that no longer has a supply line. The other one is you click on your helipad or wherever you have a supply line and you press Shift R. And that will also delete your supply line. Another useful button sometimes, especially if you're upgrading houses or villages or centrifuges, is T. So T will show you all of the same building type on the map, or all the same building, not necessarily building type. So if you go down here and you say you want to know where all of your projectors are. Well, I haven't built a lot of projectors this game, but if I press T, you'll see I have 2 here, 1 here, 1 here, and then 3 down here as well. And you can do that for any building. There's all of my villages, my cities, my towns. You can also see what the enemies, where the enemies are, the visible ones at least. Say I wanted to see where all of the radar stations are. Well, here's a few right here. And here's an enemy armory. You know, it doesn't look like they have any projectors. But there's the factories. If I wanted to upgrade all of my factories to centrifuges, I could. As long as I have the prerequisites for all the buildings that I need. Then you upgrade that to projectors and you just laughed. Ha ha ha. And then also H. H brings you directly to your king. So say I was lost and confused and somehow I sent my king all the way back here. And then I go do something, you know? I go and I decide I want to attack this bot, for example. This is getting really tiresome. These guys continuously bombing my barracks. I think we're gonna fix that problem. And then this line could just keep going that way. Alright. Well, I have no idea where my king is. I press H and nothing happens. Well, what the heck? Why does nothing happen? It's because my king is still on the road. For whatever reason, you cannot find your king when it's traversing between 2 towers. It's just, you can't find it. It's a little bit dumb, but it is what it is. But when the king finally does arrive, where is the king? Wait a second. There he is. He's not there yet. He's gonna take a little while to get there. King doesn't move very fast, unfortunately. Alright. Nope, he still hasn't arrived. Alright, let's just keep being distracted. You know, I'm not paying attention to where my king is. Who knows? I accidentally sent him off to who knows where. I'm just gonna conquer the world. I'm just gonna take over everything. I'm gonna destroy this test server. Wait a second, where's my king? I thought I put him up here. Ah, there he is. All the way up here where he's safe. Alright, come down this way, Mr. King. I have one more thing to show off, and then I think I'm gonna call this a video. I'm not gonna say this is the best tutorial video. I don't see myself as a great teacher. I don't really see myself as a good person to look to learn how to play or do anything. And obviously I didn't plan this video at all. It was all just kind of spontaneous. But I know I've seen a lot of folks be confused and unsure of how to play the game. And, it's been said a lot by a lot of different people, but it's an easy game to learn. You know, I touched the basics earlier, right? I said, if you can use supply lines, if you can make it easy to use supply lines, you're already halfway there. Like, there are so many people in the game that do not use supply lines that you'll do fine. You'll do okay just with that knowledge alone. But against more skilled players, against people who play all day, every day, who go for several hours, more advanced techniques such as your missiles, your artillery, your projectors is a lot more difficult to use. And a lot of it, some of it is just outsmarting your opponent. Figuring out their play style and how they play, and then using that knowledge to beat them. If you know your opponent's using projectors as this focal point of their units, of their armies, then you target their projectors. You use your artillery, you use your nukes, you use your EMPs, you know, what have you, and you take out their projectors with anything that you can. And even a larger player, against a larger player, you'll find yourself pushing them back just because they're not going to be able to coordinate. More and more often, I try to keep the start point of my supply line pushed back. So, for example, say I wanted to attack Atom over here. So my supply line is right here. That's well within nuke range, as we have discovered. So maybe instead of using the barracks as the focal point of my supply line, I'll come back here and I'll use this projector and I'll start running things through this projector. And then I'll use this projector to attack the enemy, right? Because that way they can't fire a nuke at it. I don't have a nuke nearby. I kind of do. It's not super nearby, though. They can't fire a nuke at it. They might be able to fire a launcher at it. They can actually fire launchers quite far. But they'd have to be able to see it. If they don't have a satellite, they're not going to be able to see this projector this far away anyway. So that's what I mean when I say outsmarting your opponent. Trying to figure out how they do things. So like me, I have a tendency of using barracks, or I have a tendency of using projectors. But when my opponent starts targeting my projectors, I'll switch to start using barracks. Or if that doesn't seem to work, I'll start using helipads as the focal points of my supply lines. And I just use towers that I don't use very often because it's easy to go. And that's my phone ringing. Alright, so I have dinner in 5. So I will have to wrap this video up quickly. But I think I've gone over the major points. I hope that this will help people learn the game a little bit. I'm not sure how good I'll be at answering any questions folks may have. But one last thing that could be kind of useful to know is your king. You can make your king... Here, let me make this a little bit easier here. You can move your king and use him to capture unoccupied territory. And I didn't know this for the longest time. And obviously you don't really want to do this unless you can't, like, use your units for some reason. But, you know, let's say you wanted to come down here. You know, this is all I have left. Go away. This is all I have left. I don't know what happened. My entire empire got destroyed. The only thing I have left is a refinery, a village, and another village. So I need to take land. I need to do something because otherwise I'm just going to die, right? Well, if you go to and try to move your king into unoccupied territory, you're not going to be able to. But you can. If you if you go to move your king and you wait for the king icon to appear and become solid, you can move your king there. Unfortunately, you can also move your king into your enemy. And a lot of people will do that to suicide their king. But unfortunately, if you made a mistake and for some reason did that accidentally, there's nothing that you can do to stop it, and you just get to sit and watch as your king slowly walks to his death. And then you get killed by a shield, the most embarrassing way to die. Alright. Well, I think that's gonna be it for this video. I'm hoping people learned something from this. It's my first kind of video that I did like this, and I really hope it helps. So, until next time, happy gaming.